and be capable of repeated viewing. Right, so we have some procedural business first of all. I know we're a bit short-handed today because a couple of members are unable to make it. They've sent their apologies and they haven't got substitutes. But I don't think we haven't got any substitutes other than that. So that's that first bit done. Do any members have an interest they wish to declare in any of the matters before us? No? Okay. And we don't have any part 2 items on the agenda, so the press and the public will be welcome to stay with us throughout. Okay. So the first item is the minutes of the previous meeting. And to remind members, this isn't an opportunity for matters arising, but just to discuss accuracy. Are there any questions of accuracy? No? Okay, that's good. Okay. Councillor Gilmore.
Just one point. Pfizer said she's running 15 minutes late, so she will be here.
Who's running 15 minutes late? Sorry.
Pfizer. Sorry, Councillor.
Sorry. Oh, Councillor Backhoff. Will be strengthened in numbers soon then. Right, so back to the minutes. I don't think there's any questions. So I think I will invite committee to approve the minutes of the previous meeting as a correct record. Agreed? Thank you. Right, my chair's communications. Yes, I'd just like to welcome everyone here and viewing that this is the last committee meeting of the municipal year. In addition to our regular audit, internal audit and counter fraud quarterly report and standards update, we have the annual audit plan to consider and approve, and also a new disciplinary policy and updated whistleblower policy to also approve. So not just matters to note today, although those are all important anyway for us to consider. I was going to say, welcome to John Hooton, who I thought would be with us, but I don't see John, so okay, that's not needed that bit then. Okay. Right, as members will recall, we received the external auditor's annual report on the council's value for money at our January meeting, and I'm keen that we can consider progress with implementation of this and the council's budget and that value for money work at our June meeting. John Hooton has agreed that this would be good timing as the external auditors will be carrying out their value for money work for the coming year this May, when they will look at the financial sustainability of the organisation, and officers will also be able to feed into this, and the auditors should be able to report back in June with their interim findings. And our meeting isn't until the back end of June, so hopefully that will be possible. And I think that will be useful to hear how progress is going. And I'm also pleased to say that Councillor Taylor will be able to join us at that meeting to be able to help support that discussion and answer any questions that we may have about how that's all going. And other matters that are covered by his cabinet remit. So I hope members will be agreeable to us including that as an additional item. And I think formally, we actually have to include that as something that gets suggested at item 54 on our agenda. But, you know, we can play this how we need to, but as I've got the legal officer sat next to me, maybe that's the right thing to do. So I'll try and remember to bring that up later. I'm sure many members have contributed to the LGA peer review. Councillor Gilmont has shared with me some very well-made points that he raised with the review regarding the presentation of information in committee agendas and committee member development, both of which I agree need to be strengthened. And we're planning to meet with officers to discuss these suggestions along with the LGA review feedback when we've had a chance to look at that. But if other members have got any relevant points to our committee work that they raised with the LGA that they wish to feed in or have, might think to contribute, let me know and we can consider that in the mix as well. So we haven't got a date for this yet, but hopefully it'll be fairly soon and then we'll be able to let you know how things are going by the next meeting. Okay, so that's the end of my chair's communications. I'll now hand over to Grace, who will perform the call over.
Yeah, can you hear me? Okay. Item 48, Internal Audit and Counter Fraud Q3 Progress Report. Item 49, Internal Audit Strategy and Annual Audit Plan 25-26. Item 50, New Disciplinary Policy and Procedure. Item 51, Updated Whistleblowing Policy. Item 52, Standards Update. All items called, Chair.
All reports called. Okay, makes it simple for me. Right, so moving along, our next item is public and member involvement. We haven't had any questions from members of the council or members of the public, so nothing to do there. So we can move on to our first report, which, according to my notes here, is on page 15 of the agenda, which is the Internal Audit and Counter Fraud Q3 Progress Report. And Caroline Sheehan will introduce.
Thank you, Chair. Okay, so this report is our progress report that we bring to you quarterly, and this is for Q3 of the reports. So up to December, you've now got all the reports for 24-25. So within that, we had one substantial assurance audit, which was Treasury Management. We have 5 reasonable assurance audits, and 2 of those were follow-ups. We've got 2 partial assurance audits, which was the Housing Plan and Major Works and the HUG prepayment vouchers report. We've also got for you to know 2 non-opinion reports, which is where we provide a bit of advice and support. So we've got the Housing, Health and Safety Regulations and the Digital City Clean report. And in addition, we've got 3 grants as well. So you'll see the summary of all of that work within the first section of the report. And then in section 2, you've got information on our counter fraud activity and our tenancy fraud activity as well, for you to look at. And then section 3, we talk about the action tracking. You will see that that's dipped a bit. So we've got 84% of high priority actions have been implemented by the end of Q3. I'm pleased to say that I've followed up on those, and I can now, people have confirmed to me that 3 of those actions have now been implemented. So there's only 1 actually outstanding now. So that's a better position. And then in section 4, we've got some changes to the audit plan. So in there, you will see that we've added New England House, a focused review on temporary accommodation and the transition of the LEP. So those reports you'll see in Q4. And to sort of accommodate some of those audits, we've removed or deferred a couple of other audits as well. So that's my summary of the report, but I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Caroline. Yes, and just to reinforce the point that this is our opportunity as members to drill down into not beyond what's on the written page. If we wish to, we can get further information, particularly from management who may not be present, to explain how they're responding to the recommendations, findings and recommendations. Okay, questions. Councillor Gilmore.
So I'll just start with a comment. I think we've kind of divided up the kind of questions and comments really. So it was just to recognise kind of excellent kind of progress really kind of highlighted in Q3 really, particularly the substantial assurance on treasury management. So it's really kind of good in terms of kind of confidence around public money, in terms of the manageability of it, and also notably the partial to reasonable assurance for CareLink. So that's really good in terms of demonstrating kind of proactive approach there really. So just to kind of comment in terms of saying, great really in terms of those points.
Well, thank you. I think it's probably the service that have obviously improved and implemented those actions. So thank you. Yeah.
Yes, I mean, we can often dwell on the negative bits, but it's good to note the positives in this, which there's always more good reports than there are bad reports before us, I think. Councillor Meadows.
Thank you, Chair. And I do have a number of questions, but I'll roll them together and you can answer.
I wouldn't expect anything less.
Yeah, thank you for the report. I love reading through these reports. But on page 26, on the HUG vouchers, I did wonder how many HUG vouchers are being used at any one time, as that could have an effect on our budget ultimately, and at what level of management has the use of these vouchers, or is there another way of someone activating those vouchers? Then on page 27, on 1.49, it talks about weaknesses in the control environment around the housing works. And I'm not quite sure what you mean by control environment. I wondered if you could explain that a bit for me, please. And also further down, it talks about contract frameworks and contractor performance are reviewed to ensure processes and procedures required to achieve value for money are in place. Are these separate to all other procurements in the city? Or, because I know that the housing revenue account is separate, are the procurement contracts separate and therefore under a separate control, if you like, environment? And then on page 29, it talks under 1.57 about City Clean moving to digital City Clean project. Now, I have to say, unfortunately, residents are still complaining the rubbish is not being collected. It's getting more around the garden waste now, something that the residents pay in addition for. And we do report everything that we get as councillors. But what I wondered was, we are getting the answers back about this digital City Clean, but that doesn't actually help us or our residents understand what is the digital City Clean. You're just moving everything, as I understand it, basically, you're removing everything that was on paper onto digital. But I can't understand why that has such an impact on the actual service itself. And then I wondered what the timescale for completion was on this digital thing, because it feels like it's an unnecessary upset for residents in some way. And then you may or may not know the answer to this one, but around the housing tenancy fraud, housing started contacting each and every tenant with a picture of them so that when they visited and had annual checks, people could see whether the property was being sublet or whether the tenant was still living in it. And everything was all right in that sense. I wondered whether those checks are still being done, because we've recovered a couple of properties, up to 10, I believe, but 2 of them here it talks about. And I think we could actually find a lot more if we were more proactive about checking who our tenants are every year. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I'm going to ask Martin Reid to come forward to the speaker position. And Martin will certainly be able to answer the housing questions. but we've also got the Hug and the City Clean as well. So if you want to kick off, Caroline, sorry.
Sorry, I've been trying to, hopefully I'll answer all of your questions, but I'm sure you'll let me know if I've missed something. So you started with the Hug vouchers and you were saying how many are activated at one time. So I think the biggest amount of money going out the door is for the school meals. So that's going out around the school meals time. So it's being used in that capacity. So that's probably most of the money, I would say. But we might need somebody from the service to come and explain exactly how much that is and how that all works for you. And then you asked about the weaknesses in controls for the housing works. I'm not quite sure what the question. That might be one for Martin actually. The control environment. So what we're talking about when we're talking about control environment is we're talking about the management of risks. So we're looking at the risks to the service, what could happen if those controls aren't placed. So a lot of those controls manage financial risk, so the loss of money. But there may be like health and safety controls. There might be all sorts of other controls in there, but they all sort of relate to risk.
We can't hear you if you've got.
Are they separate controls to and around the contract framework works to every other contract framework we have in the city, procurement wise, because our financial pieces are separate?
Yeah, it's the same contract management framework we use across the council. So that's depending. It doesn't matter which service you're in. You're expected to follow those rules, and obviously that's all been tightened up with the new procurement regulations as well. And then I think the questions you had about City Clean Digital are probably for the service to come and answer, really, to explain to you what's involved in the entirety of that project and what impact that might have on residents. And then the housing tenancy fraud checks. Obviously, we're doing work around trying to find where there might be tenancy fraud, but in terms of sort of what I think what you're talking about is knocking on doors really and checking who's there. That is something that the service would be responsible for. So again, that would be a question for them. Thank you.
I think before we go any further, it was worth saying that you've proposed there, Carolyn, that we get officers along to answer questions on a couple of those subjects, both of which were actually probably fairly obvious that they were going to get questions. I certainly was actually lining up to say we need to get them along. And really, I think perhaps it's something we need to discuss more at pre-meet, but I didn't know Martin was coming, and I'm very grateful for your presence. But we need to make sure that we think who might be needed to be here, because it's going to be a bit awkward if we've got to do this at the next meeting now. So let's hold that point. But yeah, Anne.
Can I just come back on something that Caroline spoke about the school meals, the Hug vouchers? Are they for individual schools, or is it like the contract for the contract company, if you like, that has the Hug vouchers for each use of at the schools?
So the way the system works is that we input it for individuals. So the Hug is just a vehicle really for us to provide money to an individual family or service user. So it's actually officers who then input that information into the system.
Shall we move over to Martin to be able to defend the wicket for the housing?
Thank you, Councillor Meadows. Just picking up, Carolyn covered some of these points. This is the kind of plan and major works audit around the plan and major works capital programmes that are agreed every year at Cabinet. And when you ask questions about the contract framework and contractor performance, that's around the contractors we have in place to deliver planned and major works such as windows, doors, roofs, contractors, mechanical and electrical, and contractors of major works. The detail behind that line is really around making sure that all the contracts are performing as they should be and the procedures are consistently followed. And the consistency word is the word. It's around making sure we consistently follow procedures. There are procedures in place. The audit talks about strengthening those procedures, strengthening risk assessments, having more intensive overview. But essentially, in relation to the question you asked, Anne, it's about consistency and ensuring also that all contracts are in place and signed. That's about keeping up to date with contracts, of which there are many in this area. In terms of the control environment, Caroline answered that. In terms of tenancy visits, we are moving back to doing proactive tenancy visits. At the moment, that's where we go out and visit our tenants to ensure that we understand who's in our homes. It's a really big regulatory requirement these days. Post-Grenfell, the whole regulatory and legislative change says we should know our tenants and know our homes. So at the moment, most of our tenancy visits have of necessity been driven by responding to health and safety issues. So on the large panel system blocks, we visited well over 500 tenants to make sure we understood who was in those homes, and that's part of our programme we've continued now on the Bristol estate. So we've done significant numbers of tenancy visits, and we hope to carry that on. And in fact, the Housing Revenue Account budget has extra funding in it this year to be more proactive around tenancy visits. So we are looking at getting back to a phase where we regularly visit people in their homes so we understand what their needs and requirements are. It's quite health and safety led at the moment, but we do want to move back to it being a process that we just follow as good practice. And it's a regulatory area which we're trying to make sure we comply with. The regulator doesn't say you must do tenancy visits, but they say you must know your tenants. So that's what we're investing in.
Yes.
Just one, I didn't get a response back from Caroline, sorry. The timescale for completion of the digital City Clean, please.
I'm not entirely clear what the timeline is at the moment, so I'd need to pick that up with the service so I can find that out for you.
I'm going to go back to Martin here because I mean, when I read this report, I was pretty concerned because I think there's 11 remarks there from Audit about why they only gave a partial assurance, and they're all very serious matters from strategic to operational level. It's not a new field for us. It's something that we should know what we're doing. And what concerns me is that we've got, I forget the number, there's 11,000 dwellings. I don't know if that includes all the leaseholders as well, but I think we need to be hearing how people can be assured that this is going to be sorted out, because when I attend the housing area committee meetings, there's always a continual procession of issues that are raised by tenants and leaseholders about how things have been failing to be delivered in a timely and costly way. And these are fairly fundamental problems that we're looking at from this report. And I think we need to hear, Martin, the timescale for which it's going to be possible to put this right and what the deficiencies are that have allowed it to come about.
So thank you. So if I take that, and you want to list, I'll lead on that. So we asked for the audit, and it actually came about following our procurement of planned and major works contracts following the end of the Mears Partnering Agreement, which was some time ago now. But we actually did procure a whole new framework of planned and major works following that move back to the council. The audit was slightly delayed simply because of circumstances. We'd been to Housing and New Homes Committee to explain that our major works audit framework was problematic in terms of achieving some of the outcomes because many contractors weren't actually bidding on work. So we've kind of shifted how we deal with major works contracts and making sure that we're getting value for money. So that's work in progress. And in terms of some of the key actions, one of them is which we're working on at the moment, is a new asset management strategy. And that's probably the most fundamental strategic thing we have to do. The whole world of housing has changed, as I've said before, post-Grenfell, with the new legislative and regulatory framework. So we have to make sure that our asset management strategy reflects really key areas, such as where we are in terms of our regulatory compliance, all the surveys we've done as part of that compliance work. The asset management strategy has to reflect where we are with our large panel system blocks, which is major, and also we're updating our housing strategy. So the asset management strategy, the housing strategy was updated last year, and the housing strategy was updated last year. We're updating the asset management strategy this year. That has to flow, and that's a piece of work that's ongoing with a view to getting that approved this year. So the asset management strategy, which is the most significant strategic bit of work, has to follow a process whereby we've had to have it reflect in the housing strategy the work that's being done on large panel system blocks, and also some of the regulatory work we've been doing. So that's probably the biggest strategic bit of work. And then we have to work around ensuring our procedures, process and policies are in place to make sure that we're delivering robust planned and major works programs. And that's an absolute priority for us. And we have got timescales within the audit within which to do that. And I believe we'll be re-audited later this year and we'll come back. And we're working very hard to make sure we are moving away from partial assurance. So the assurance is really around the strategic work is underway. It does need to reflect lots that's been going on in housing, and the process and procedure work is underway as well, with a view to getting re-audited and coming back here with a high level of assurance. And we also, in our budget this year, Housing Revenue Account budget, have invested significantly more in terms of contractor capacity to deliver works, and also capacity within the team, particularly around housing, health and safety compliance, to put in extra resources to actually make sure we are compliant and we're staying compliant. And that includes some of the outcomes of this audit, meeting the requirements of that.
Okay, but thank you. I mean, I do appreciate regulations have changed, but a lot of this isn't about regulation. It's about our internal processes and project management and things like that. So I'm glad the audit will be later this calendar year, so we can hope to, see how that goes. And I mean, as I say, it's pretty important for a huge number of people in this city to feel confident that their housing is being managed properly, along with the cost of it if they're leaseholders. So, thank you. I also, what we'll hopefully do is have somebody along to explain the digital city clean situation. I have to say, it did make me think when I saw that the process of improving city clean is now 8 years and running, according to we're told it started in 2018. And in no disrespect to the officers that have been working very hard on that, the comments here that we see before us, notwithstanding the fact that we might have somebody to answer questions at the next meeting, but there is a long list here again about concerns in relationship to this. And it feels to me a question of, does City Clean have sufficient project management strength to be able to deliver this novel programme? That's what's jumping off the page at me. So I think that just as a question in advance, really, that's, I think, what I will need to be convinced about, really, because generally speaking, City Clean has struggled with all manner of things. I appreciate this isn't going to be an easy thing to achieve. So that's what I'd like to be hearing anyway. Okay, have we got any other questions or points to make? Councillor Gilman?
Okay. So just one again on coming back to the Hove payments. So I was just wondering, you probably can't answer this right now, but in terms of what the overall liability is, so say that Hove was to go insolvent, what would be the liability that would rest on us in terms of, I'm just wondering how that kind of payment works in terms of, is all the money kind of put on at once and then the liability is higher, or is it kind of, shifted throughout the year? I'm sure it's probably a bit of both. So that's the question. I don't.
So my understanding of the way the hub system works is you put the money on and it's fairly quickly taken off. I suppose the biggest liability would be the time of year when we're putting lots of stuff on for schools, because obviously that's more money. But if you think of it, it's a system that really replaces in some ways petty cash and things like that. So it's a more secure system than actually providing cash for people. But obviously it's not without its own risk as well.
So just had another question on 1.32 budget management. So progress from partial to reasonable assurance. So really reassuring in that sense. Obviously, given budget management so big, and we're kind of dealing with 924 million with a proposed saving of 23 million. So the question is, in terms of which specific services currently face the kind of greatest challenge there? And in terms of targeted savings, and are there any kind of additional supports that you're putting in to kind of mitigate that?
I think that's probably one for John Hooton, maybe so if I take that one question away about additional support. Thank you.
That may work well, that question, at the next meeting, if we've got John and the external auditors looking at how we're getting on with.
Yeah, just say for next
and Councillor Tate.
So no rush.
Okay. Any more questions? Councillor Gage.
Thanks. It's good to see that a planned audit of New England House has been added to the plan in the amendments to the audit plan, with a request from the Chief Executive to provide a lessons learned review. Can you just say a bit more about the scope of that review, please?
Oh, that's okay. Yeah, so the review, I haven't got the specifics, but the review was very much focused on trying to understand the lessons around the programme and project management there, and in particular the communication that was happening within the organisation. So the review was looking at the chain of events going back historically, and it was looking at what information was available, where that information was reported, what action was taken in relation to that. I haven't got the specific terms of reference to be able to quote that, but the report is now finalised, and as I understand it, it's coming to this committee at the next meeting, I believe.
Councillor Meadows, you thought of another one?
Yes, I have found another one. Thank you. On page 31, the use of the corporate car club. It says here that the car club contacted council to recover a debt totaling almost 24,000. And the investigation found evidence that there was a lack of oversight, responsibility and accountability. I'm just wondering, did the council pay that debt? In which case, did we have the budget to do that with? Or is it under a separate budget, really? I just wondered how that 23,792 was paid.
So we've identified what the debt was, and I think they're going through the course of trying to work out who should be paying what. So there's some parts of that are being repaid by individuals, but there will be some of that we are liable for, probably.
Councillor Gilmore?
Yeah, just had a question. So you've taken the SEND off the planned audit, and you're kind of shifting it into a bigger audit. It sounds like it. So 4.2. I was just wondering what that looks like and when that's going to potentially be coming to committee.
Yeah. So we've done previously another complex care placements audit. So we've looked at that side, which came out really well, actually. It's a very, very good. And we were just going to look at the other side, which was all the SEND. But it's all come at the same time where there's a wider review of commissioning. So I think it was felt that there was no point in us carrying on doing sort of the phase 2 of the audit, and actually we would be better placed in coming back at a later date and looking at commissioning as a whole. So that was sort of decided with the director as well.
Councillor Gage.
Sorry to come back to it, but just on the housing plan and major works, I noticed that alongside the strategic actions, there's a new programme management framework recommended, and you've mentioned reviewing programme management in terms of how New England House has been handled. I just wondered if we are assured of sufficient or suitable programme management expertise in the council, and whether you have any views or would like to speak to that.
I think it's fair to say there's a bit of a theme, and it's coming out in this report, isn't it? There's a bit of a theme there for contract management and project management. So I think it is seen as an area that maybe we do need to make, the council needs to make some improvements on. I can't speak to what the wider, I know that has been taken on board by senior management, and I know that they've got plans in place, but I couldn't speak to you about what exactly those plans are at the moment. So actually it's a good question for senior management.
Thank you. Are we all happy? Okay, thank you. Can I thank Martin in particular for coming forward today, and we'll look forward to hearing from the other officers that we need to get more from at our next meeting. We mustn't forget to get those items back on the agenda. Okay. Oh, thank you very much. We've just got to look at the recommendations now of the report, which are, I don't know quite where they are actually. It doesn't say so in the running order. But, we get eyes on. The recommendation is for committee to note the report. Do we agree? Okay, thank you. Right, moving on then. We have the internal audit strategy and annual audit plan 2025-26, and Russell Banks will introduce that.
Thank you, Chair. So this is a report that follows a similar format to previous years. It's broken down into two main elements, which is our internal audit strategy, which sets out how we go about delivering and planning our work. And then as an appendix, you will see a detailed plan of individual activities through the year, but it also includes details of planned counter-fraud work. The plan we produce, we're required to produce each year because at the end of the year, I'm required to provide an opinion on the council's governance, risk management, internal control arrangements, and I need to ensure that we have delivered an appropriate amount and scope of work to enable me to reach such an opinion. The plan itself, as always, is risk-based. And as you can imagine, we do have a finite level of resource, so we have to be careful about how we use that resource, and as much as we would like to audit every activity of the council every year, that simply isn't possible. So we use risk as a basis for prioritising the work. The level of coverage itself, expressed in audit days, is consistent with previous years, both in relation to the core internal audit plan and also the tenancy and counter-fraud activities that is funded through the HRA. Whilst Appendix 2 does list out all of the individual pieces of work we plan to do in the year, it is important to emphasise that the plan has to remain flexible. And so we try to deal with as much of that flexibility as we can through contingency, and also an amount of time that we refer to as emerging risks. So it's basically capacity set aside ready to respond to new and emerging risks that inevitably will occur during the course of the year. However, as is often the case, there will be occasions where we will need to amend the plan during the course of the year, as we've done in the current year. But in all cases, that will be a determination made based on risk, and we will be bringing those amendments back to this committee to ensure you have complete visibility of that. One of the areas that will have the potential to impact on the plan for 25-26 is LGR, local government reorganisation. We really don't know what the impact of that is going to be at this time, but we know that there is likely to be some change, and with change brings risk. And this is something that is prevalent in all three of the Orbis partner councils, so we're taking a similar approach for all three. So we have set some time aside, and then we will flesh that time out into individual pieces of work as we know more, and we'll be able to scope that out into more detailed pieces of work over the course of the year. But again, we will ensure that we come to this committee and give you visibility over that as we know more. We also made provision within the plan for follow-up reviews. So as you'll be aware, any review that results in either partial or minimal assurance will automatically trigger a follow-up by us, where we will go back and confirm that management have implemented the actions. But we also perform action tracking of all high-risk actions. And indeed, that's one of our key performance indicators for the service. So given the responsibilities of this committee, the final section of the strategy you'll see is set out in relation to internal audit performance. So you are required to satisfy yourselves that the internal audit service proves effective. And so we try to provide you with enough information to be able to enable you to reach that determination. A key element of that, as well as our key performance indicators, is compliance with professional standards. And up until the 1st of April this year, it was public sector internal audit standards, and we've year on year and quarter by quarter reported our compliance with those. But with effect from April 25, those have been replaced with global internal audit standards that apply to all internal audit services, regardless of sector, and the same standards around the world. So we are in the process of conducting a self-assessment against those, and the results of that will be reported back to this committee during the course of the year. However, having near completion of that, I'm confident that we are in conformance with those standards, subject to some relatively minor amendments to some of our documentation, including the charter. And so we're asking you as a committee to approve the charter or note the charter as it stands currently, but that charter will be amended during the course of the coming months, and we will bring that back to you for approval. But I'm not expecting those amendments to be significant, just updates in order to reference compliance with the new standards. Very happy to take any.
Are you adding to the recommendations, Russell?
Sorry?
Just at the moment when you say something that I really need to listen to, I miss the beginning of the point. So as I'm fiddling about trying to find the pages here. So were you suggesting that we need to we need to note the charter and then?
Yeah, so we're asking you to note the charter today, the current charter, but recognise that we'll be coming back to you with an updated charter during the course of the coming months, in having been updated to reflect the new standards.
And that's covered by the existing 2.1 recommendation, is it?
Yes.
Okay. Councillor Gilmore.
So might as well start on the charter of the global internal audit standards. So really good that obviously we've got this coming in, although I'd imagine it's quite dry, as we've previously discussed. So what I was wondering was what the kind of practical changes are. Is there anything in terms of the planning or the reporting or the following up of the audits that will kind of
specifically see, or that we could see as members as well, in terms of a physical change, in terms of that dynamic. And we're actually quite fortunate because we completed a huge amount of work historically ensuring compliance with public sector internal audit standards. And whereas a lot of private sector organisations didn't have an equivalent of that. So having pretty much completed the self-assessment, I've been quite pleased that there are really no fundamental differences. The requirements around reporting, the information the committee receives, how we engage with the committee, how we conduct our work is all very, very similar. There are some elements that the committee may need to consider, but as I say, they really aren't significant, and some of it is about how much information we provide you with as a committee. So, for example, the standards talk about us reporting to you on the detailed results of our self-assessment against them and our action plans for improvement. We have to think carefully about how we do that, because the standards are 120 pages long, and there's just something about finding the right balance between the amount of detail that you receive to enable you to fulfill your responsibilities as a committee and not swamping you with unnecessary information. So I will be thinking carefully about that and bringing some reports back to the committee in the year.
Thank you. You happy with that? Councillor Gage.
Really glad to see that you've left the flexibility there to respond to emerging risks and the possibility of remodelling, and that you will assess those on a risk prioritised basis. I just wanted to ask what that will look like in practice, what framework you'll use for that, and will that be a proactive assessment of emerging risks, or will it be reactive, and at what sort of time periods? How will it be triggered?
So on the emerging risks, what we tend to do is work, particularly Carolyn, will work very closely with management through the course of the year, with the Section 151 officer, with the monitoring officer, with the statutory officer of the council. And we very much keep a watch. We also have quite extensive service liaison that takes place with all services. So members of my team will meet regularly with senior officers from across the council, if nothing else, just to maintain an oversight of what's happening within the organisation. And it's through that activity that the new pieces of audit work will fall out. So we will identify through that there may be a new change programme happening here, or there's been a development in this service, and that's exactly the type of work, a prompt that we will use then to determine how we use that emerging risk time. In terms of the nature of the activity, it's a combination. In some cases, it will be a formal review that will result in an audit opinion. In other cases, it will be more proactive, real-time advice and support, particularly if it's a major project or change programme, where we will sort of run alongside it and provide advice and support as it's happening. LGR will probably be a really good example of that. So I can see situations where a lot of our work will be providing advice, but there will equally be individual pieces of discrete work falling out of that I could see happening, where we will go away and decide to do something very specific. We are in the fortunate position that we are working across multiple organisations, so we have the benefit of taking learning from those other organisations and learning from here to share with the other organisations. So we're basically waiting to gear up for that activity as it happens.
Councillor Gilman?
Yeah, just on the LGR, are we going to get any extra funding from national governments in terms of kind of carrying out that work and kind of supporting you in terms of the risk management? Because I'd imagine it could consume your time quite quickly. Yeah, very good question, and one that I've been asked by
other audit committees as well, actually, around the impact of internal audit. The reality is that I'm not expecting any additional funding for my service to support that. So what I am anticipating is if that activity does ramp up to the sort of extent that it could do, we're going to have to make some relatively tough decisions on what activities within the audit plan we don't do within the year in order to prioritise that LGR activity.
Well, I'll just add on that. I think government has got a habit of underfunding initiatives. So if we have to do anything of scale, we could have a bit of a problem on our hands, not just from the audit point of view, but there would only be so much in the standing capacity to be able to wiggle a few things off the end of the queue to make enough room for whatever we have to do for LGR. We may need to buy in some extra resource, as you're suggesting, but how we pay for that, again, it's an open question for now, isn't it? But I wouldn't get too excited about government giving us all we need. I mean, it's pretty clear they're under their own financial pressures that don't seem to want to go away, so it could be difficult. Right. I don't know if you want to say any more about that, as to whether we're getting anything from the tea leaves on this sort of thing. But I mean, one of the questions I have, and I know we've discussed this before, Russell, is that the problem is that with Orbis partnership, which is how our audit function is supported through Orbis, and we get all those specialisms to hand to support our local embedded offices, which is absolutely fantastic. The problem is that East and West Sussex will be going through the same experience as us through LGR, and so they'll have their ask as well, so you'll quite easily max out the total capacity available. That could be a problem, really, but anyway, you can't answer these questions, but we must maintain a watching brief. But go ahead, please.
Yeah, just on that point, I think that is a risk, although I perhaps look at it slightly differently in the sense that each partner has an envelope of audit days that we are committed to delivering. So that envelope won't change. So each partner will receive the same, in quantity terms, the same amount of work. You're right that there may be individual elements of the service that might become stretched, but I think some of that will be offset by the shared learning and the ability that we will have had to use the same individuals who will have had experience in one place to apply that learning to the other partners. So whilst it is a risk, some of it is offset, but it's something that I will be having to manage very carefully over the year ahead.
Okay, thank you. Any more questions? No? Okay. Thank you. Oh, we do. A late hand. Councillor Gilmore.
So just kind of like touching on the IT and cybersecurity, which I was kind of pleased to see that it was on there. I was just wondering in terms of the kind of prioritisation. When I was kind of reading through it, mentioned kind of add your own device in terms of breaches, and I was just wondering, is that something that's already happening in terms of the council, in terms of using personal devices, and that opening up a kind of angle of a potential kind of data breach? And then the other thing I was interested in was just the Online Safety Act that came into 2003, and how that's kind of impacting the council and the schools, if that's something that's you could talk to. So neither of those are my areas of expertise. I'm afraid my IT audit manager is not here today. I think with add your own device, though, I'm not sure specifically what the initiatives are here, but it is something we've been looking at the other partner councils, and we've been doing quite a lot of work around the importance of the control environment, particularly in relation to data. And a lot of that is around personal discipline on the parts of individuals. So a lot of that work is looking at the guidance and the training and so on that's going with that. But I can certainly ask Mark Winton, who's our IT audit manager, to
to provide a little more information on both of those, if that's something you're outside of this meeting, if that's something you're interested in.
That's okay. You're fishing for things to do with what we're hoping to discuss fairly soon for some improvements, aren't you, Councillor Gilmore, which is good news. You've got another follow-up question there?
Yeah.
I'll put you off there. Somebody got a mic? Is that not working?
Oh,
really?
Okay. So also just on the schools, and maybe this is just outside of your remit, so don't worry if it is. We touched on it in a previous audit meeting in terms of how the schools are selected, and I was just wondering, is it kind of a risk-based cycle that you choose certain schools, or does it just kind of flow around? I was kind of wondering how you pick those particular schools that you audit.
Okay. So we've only got a very select number of days for schools, so we try and use it as wisely as possible. So we do liaise with our finance colleagues and other colleagues across council to work out where we would be best to target our resources. It is true that if you haven't been audited for a very long time, you're more likely to be audited, but it's also on scale as well. There are certain schools that obviously they would like us to look at, so that's what we do, really.
Councillor Mackie.
Yeah, I still don't have a clear understanding whether there is a specific undertaking with regard to schools in line with the Online Safety Act. And I just would like to know if there's a yes or no answer to that.
Unfortunately, I don't know the answer, but I can find out. We can. It's not an area that I know the detail of, so I'm not in a position to say yes or no. But I can take it away and find out for you.
Thank you.
Policy area that's being discussed at the moment, isn't it? I think with mobiles in school and things like that. So it may become part of what's looked at in the future with schools audits. I don't know. I'm getting the impression it's probably not on the list at the moment, but it's something that's emerging as a concern for schools and parents. So yeah, okay. Councillor Gay.
Thank you. Sorry if it's labouring a point, just to get it clear in my head. So that you're asking whether schools will be audited for compliance with the Online Safety Act. Mm-hmm. Is that generally a line of inquiry with schools when you audit them, their legal compliance with the overarching legal framework for education?
Sorry, I misunderstood the question then when I said I didn't know. I'm going to defer to Carolyn.
So when we look at the school audits, we've got a whole range of risks that we look at. So we do look at sort of how they're controlling some of their data and things sometimes, like, just to make sure that they have policies and procedures in place. So it's quite a high level look. So we're not delving down into individual circumstances, emails, and etc. But we'll be looking to see that have they got the right policies and procedures in place to support that environment and to control it. But in terms of the Online Safety Act, we haven't included that into our schools audit plan at the moment. But it's possible that with that other overarching Online Safety Act audit, that schools will come into that mix. And I think that's the bit that we're not quite sure. We're going to check with Mark Winton, but it's not part of the schools audit programme at the moment.
Councillor Gurge.
Yeah, thank you. One more follow-up. So would you also be considering whether they're compliant with the Equality Act in light of the recent Supreme Court ruling?
When we look at them, when we're looking at the areas that we're looking at, we're looking to see that they're in compliance with all legislations, all procedures and things like that. So we are looking at that. But if you appreciate, when we go into schools, there is so much to look at. So we're looking at income, we're looking at payments, we're looking at contract management. It's so vast, and we only have a very small budgeted amount of days to do the audit. So anything we do look at is quite high level in terms of looking at policies and procedures. So we will look at that, but we might not look at the specifics of what you're asking. So just to be clear.
Okay. If there's no more questions, I'll just say thank you. I mean, that's been a really, really good discussion. I think we've all learnt quite a lot more than we knew at the beginning of the day, so that's really appreciated. It must be quite challenging having to face so many questions from members over such a range of things, so well done, and I appreciate it. So we have the recommendations before us, which are to approve the internal audit strategy and internal audit plan, and to note the internal audit charter, which will be amended at a later date. So we're content with that, hopefully. So are we happy to agree the recommendations? Okay, thank you. Right, moving on. Our next item is the new disciplinary policy and procedure, and I've got Ken Simpson here to introduce that.
Thank you, Chair. So all employers should have procedures in place to deal with matters related to conduct and performance of its staff, and the processes to be implemented where there are concerns. And obviously, such procedures should be compliant with relevant ACAS codes of practice and employment law generally. The existing policy has been in place for quite a number of years, since December 2012, and requires updating to ensure it meets best practice, current legislation, and the Council's changing needs. The key changes that have gone into the procedure are a new equality and diversity statement, which is now standard for all of our workforce policies, setting out and reiterating the Council's commitment to equalities. We are moving from having 3 levels of warning, a first, second and final, to just 2, a first and a final, which is in line with standard practice. And a reduction in the length of time that first and final written warnings remain live, which will bring them into line with what ACAS suggests in the codes of practice. Some clarity and more definition around the roles of trade union and HR representatives at formal meetings, and an updated list of examples of misconduct and gross misconduct. We've consulted with our trade unions through our internal policy consultative group, which also includes representatives from services, HR, and our equalities, diversity and inclusion team. The discussions and feedback at a range of meetings where this was discussed have fed into and impacted the final version. So committee is asked to approve the revised policy and to authorise the Director of People and Innovation to take forward implementation on or after the 1st of May. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Meadows.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Tracy, for the report. I was trying to read all of it, and I fully agree with bringing down the number of appeals, like if you written notices of warning, bringing it down to 2 and bringing that into line. That does make perfect sense. But I was just trying to go to the links on the employees' code of conduct and equality and inclusion strategy. They didn't work on the public or ModGov thing, so I had a bit of difficulty with that. I just wondered, following a question from earlier, does it need to be updated at all following the Supreme Court Justice ruling? And will it have any impact on any other policies, given that this is 13 years old, this policy? It's quite a long time for us to update it. And I just wondered if it is truly up to date, as that will have an impact on those. Thank you.
I can see this moving forward in their chair. I'm sure it's going to take a while to process the Supreme Court judgment and all its impacts, but I'll leave Ken answer the question.
Yes, and obviously the things are changing all the time. There's huge amounts of legislation that's expected in the coming year in relation to the government's employment rights bill. So we're constantly reviewing it. This has taken a long time to be updated, but it is up to date with what we are currently aware of in terms of current legislation, and in particular current ACAS guide, the ACAS codes of practice, which isn't law, but tribunals are required to have reference to. So it isn't so much about legislation that's changed. We obviously haven't addressed directly the most recent ruling. It's not obviously apparent any immediate impact on the policy and how we operate that in terms of that particular context. But like everyone else, we'll be going through those sorts of changes and updating our guidance as and when. Updating policies if we need to because of those changes in law.
Can I just ask, will those updates come back to us? Will they be necessary to come back to us, or will they just be implemented?
I think it will depend on the nature of the changes in terms of the level of detail, or if it's a major fundamental change, or if it's just technical around wording or something like that. We'd have to review the impact. And apologies, I didn't answer one of your questions, which is around the links, which aren't live in the draft, but I'm happy to send you a live version, all the links separately to committee members, so you can access that, because it should take its place of the wave.
Can I just follow up and ask a question here? Maybe Liz will help as well. But I mean, this hasn't been updated since 2012. And I know from asking before, and as you've said, Ken, different guidance changes all the time. And it doesn't somehow seem to matter that our policy isn't capturing all that on the Hove. How does that work in reality? Does that weaken our position at all?
I think the main point is that a policy is drafted flexibly enough to ensure that it will make a broad statement such as, that the disciplinary policy will be in accordance with the law. So should piece of legislation change, we would continue to operate in accordance with the law. So it doesn't need to list every piece of legislation or the date of specific guidance. We would, for example, commit to ensuring that we always comply with ACAS code of practice. Well, that might be a 2018 code of practice or a 2024 code of practice, but the policy itself needs to be drafted in a way that it doesn't become obsolete every 5 minutes when something changes. So, that's why it's been we've been fine and on firm ground to have the policy that we've had in place for some time, and it's a choice to update it. And we've obviously taken the decision to come with an updated and improved policy, but it doesn't mean that the previous one was in any way putting the council at risk of challenge.
Councillor Gage.
Yeah, thank you. I think it's very welcome to see it updated after such a period. My question is, are you going to roll out the updated policy with any sort of support or training for line managers? And would that be an opportune moment to include an updated context in light of legal developments?
So we don't have formal training at the moment on these sorts of processes. Partly that's because as a manager, you may deal with something like this once in your career or in other areas much more frequently. So managers are always supported in when they've got actual cases by professional HR advisors and often support from legal colleagues to work through cases, the individual circumstances and the context. So that's how we make sure that managers are equipped and have the abilities and the understanding they need to be able to go through a particular case, through a particular procedure.
Okay, Councillor Gilmore, and then Councillor Barker.
Yeah, so really good unions were involved, so it's really positive, particularly from our standpoint. And just to echo kind of what Miller said in terms of, it's positive to have a policy that's being updated, and it's pushing best practice forward. So all of those are good things from my perspective. I was just wondering, in terms of just a question, how we're distinguishing in the policy between, say, misconduct and kind of capability issues, and yeah, just how you're balancing those up, really.
So the policy does make reference to there should, when a manager is looking at an issue where there are concerns, as to look and they're looking and they're investigating that, is it a matter of performance and capability, or is it a matter of conduct? That isn't always an easy distinction. It can be quite difficult, but the policy definitely kind of encourages and asks managers to consider if something is better handled under a different procedure. And there's not a lot of guidance on how that manifests or how that decision will be taken, largely because it will be so specific to the facts of the case. But the policy is clear that for issues that are about performance, we have a capability procedure for that, and issues that are related to attendance should be dealt with under the separate attendance management procedure.
Councillor Backhoff.
Thank you, Chair. My question is for the current policy, the advice has been taken from, you said, CAS, and for community engagement consultations, and the PCG, all right, and also service manager representative, GMB, Unison, and HR representative, equality, diversity, inclusion, on behalf of the community and to represent all the community. My question is, are you confident that all these who are mentioned here are enough representation for the community?
Yes.
You okay with the question, Ken?
Oh, sorry.
Mike.
There we go. Thank you. Sorry about that. Start without putting the mic on. Yes. So that policy consultative group is a relatively new innovation. We've only had it in place the last couple of years, and this is the first major policy review we've actually had to go through it. And that has worked quite well in terms of bringing together various groups, particularly service managers, and getting a kind of managerial input into obviously dealing with these things day to day. I think we can always expand and involve more people, and depending on the circumstances, we will involve different stakeholders, depending on the nature of the policy and what its focus is. But I think for this, we're comfortable in terms of the representation we had in terms of unions who we have to consult with, and other colleagues around the table.
And what does the thinking of participation of the unions look like actually practical?
So the unions will have they have standing members of our policy consultative group who tend to attend, but also they have regular routes into HR and to the corporate leadership team and will raise issues. So they will come to meetings, we will share drafts and papers, they will respond and give feedback. And I know there was I think it made detail that's in the report. There were several meetings of the policy consultative group over several months. There was also a separate meeting with the GMB because they requested one. So yeah, we don't limit the ability to continue to debate and have discussion, and it will go through several iterations. So the unions are usually very engaged, and if they feel it's necessary, they will drive things outside of that policy consultative group, and have to have more detailed discussions depending on what the matters are. Does that answer the question?
Okay. You've got a further question? Go ahead. We can't hear you.
Is about the mediation teamwork. I don't know how practically it looks like on the ground, and also whether there is diversity of representation in the team. First part is how does it really practically work out the mediation team work? I mean, how do they do it exactly? And also if the team has diversity of representation.
The policy consultative group, is that what you're referring to? Apologies. The diversity of the policy consultative group, the group that discussed the policy. Yeah, so I don't have that information. I would likely have be able to access that level of detail about the individuals in that group. It's quite a small, relatively small group, so I wouldn't have that information.
Presumably a lot of the members of the group are there because they hold certain roles. Would that be the case?
Yes, so there'll be the service reps are nominated by individual directorates. The HR colleagues are there because of their particular functions. So, and it's led by my team who own our HR policy estate. The manager of the Equalities, Diversity Inclusion team attends, and Saba, who fortunately now has left us, but I know she was involved in this process, Saba Holmes. And obviously the unions, they will nominate their representatives as they see fit. And as I said, we will, depending on the subject matter, we will bring in others who we want to involve from a stakeholder perspective. So, for example, when we review the attendance management policy, which is something that will be coming up this year, there will be, I'm certain that there will be engagement and discussions with particular groups of interest. I mean, all of our workers, forums and networks are likely to be interested, but in particular our disabled and carers network, for example, on that particular area of policy.
And you said the diversity inclusion team are represented.
They're standing members of that group.
Okay. Have you got another question, Councillor?
Yeah, still on the same the mediation teamwork. Considering it's unofficial, because it states it's unofficial, so I presume the data isn't noted down. So in that case, how do you assess how well it's working or how bad it is? Or where the areas, the most problematic areas are? How do you assess that? So that you need to focus more work there. And also, how do you recognize offenders who might be, repeated offenders or troublemakers and need more procedures to deal with?
Thank you. So in terms of that group, and I think I misunderstood an earlier question, so anything workforce policy related, we will take to that group now, even if it's relatively light, to ensure there's broader engagement and at an earlier stage. And some things will need to be done more formally that require more heavy-ended sort of consultation with the unions formally, for example. In terms of understanding issues, which is more about the impact of the policy, that doesn't sit with that particular group, which was specifically set up to basically get views on proposed changes. But we do hold a range of data about our workforce and what happens. We do hold employee relations and disciplinary casework data. And one of the things referenced in the report talks about the most up-to-date equalities data we have around disciplinary procedures, which shows that men are disproportionately disciplined compared to their representation in the workforce, for example, which is interesting for a number of reasons, depending on where that is and the detail you go into. But also confirms that there isn't disproportionate, or doesn't appear to be disproportionate impact on people with other protected characteristics. So we do have a range of data. Services look at that and we correlate that with things like grievances, other performance data, staff survey data, and our HR business partners work with senior management teams to identify issues in their areas based on what that data shows and where casework might be happening, and that sort of thing.
Okay, thank you. I see Councillor Meadows has disappeared, so I'm thinking we're moving towards the recommendations. I hope we're still clear.
Yeah.
Yes, we are. Yeah. Okay. Right. I'm guessing nobody else has got a question. So thank you, Ken, for presenting and answering all of those. The recommendations are that the committee approves a new policy and procedure for it to be implemented on or after the 1st of May. So no pressure on us. And the interim director, People and Innovation, is authorised to take the necessary steps to implementation and publish the new policy and procedure, including determining any transitional arrangements. So, are we agreed? Good. Agreed. Thank you. I'm going to suggest that we take Anne's lead and just have a quick 5-minute break, because I'm in need of just a tiny rest before we take the final couple of items. Fully expecting you'll have plenty of questions on those as well, so it won't necessarily be done in 5 minutes. Is that okay? Okay, thank you.
What time do you want to come back? 5 minutes.
Yeah, 5 minutes. Okay, I think we're just ready to restart. Right, so our next item is item 51 on page 87, which is updated whistleblowing policy, and Liz will introduce. Thank you.
Thank you. So the report in relation to the Council's whistleblowing policy that's in front of you is for approval of an updated whistleblowing policy, and also, secondly, to propose an annual report comes to this committee to review both the process but also the numbers of whistleblowing complaints that have been received. And I wanted to say at the outset that that is something that hasn't happened to date in terms of having an annual report to this committee around the whistleblowing arrangements. You do take reports in relation to standards complaints, for example, and you have your regular updates from our internal audit colleagues and external audit. So I do feel that whistleblowing should be added to that programme as something that you are cited on in terms of the volume and any themes that arise from that. So that's the proposal. The second part of the report, firstly, as I say, is to approve the updated policy. So the whistleblowing policy exists, as you will know, to ensure that those who have concerns that they feel can't be raised through other mechanisms have the opportunity to raise those. It's primarily aimed at council staff, and there are statutory protections for protected disclosures made under the policy, but it can also, it's drafted broadly, so it can also be used by residents and councillors should they feel that that's the appropriate avenue for them. We do have a dedicated whistleblowing email address, which is monitored daily, which ensures that there is a clear framework for whistleblowing referrals to be made and a clear process to ensure anonymity if that's requested. So in terms of what's changed for this policy, the new policy, and the reason you don't have a track changes version is because it has been substantially rewritten in order to be clearer. So it clarifies, it gives more information about how and who can use the policy. It gives more information on the legal protections that are in place for employees, more detail around the signposting for other agencies, and is up to date in that sense, whereas the previous policy did need review in terms of offers that it referred to and links that it was used. So it's very much timely to have this review to ensure that the policy is right up to date with all of the contact details, etc., that are on there. In relation to complaints, the report, the types of whistleblowing matters that are raised, the report sets out some data on whistleblowing complaints, which you'll find in the table on page 90. It's quite sparse, the data currently, in terms of just broadly being the numbers that we have. And you'll see that for 2024-25, we're reporting that there were 20 whistleblowing complaints made. What I would like to do is when we come back with an annual report, we look to dig a bit deeper into the themes and to include any outcomes that aren't reported elsewhere, so that there's a summary in the same way that our internal audit colleagues do in their reports, report a summary of actions where we can obviously do that whilst maintaining anonymity. So other matters that I wanted to flag, I think, are just item 3.13 in the report, which explains where further detail around whistleblowing can be found. So where whistleblowing relates to allegations of fraudulent behaviour or financial irregularity, then these elements are investigated by internal audit and counter fraud, and they will issue a control report highlighting required improvements, and that work is summarised in the quarterly internal audit and counter fraud progress report that comes to this committee. So I did want to flag that, but very happy to take questions in relation to this report and any feedback that you may have. Thank you.
Thanks, Liz. Councillor Gage.
Thank you. Yeah, all those amendments that you detail are very positive, and it's very positive to see this policy being brought forward. And to see an annual assessment or analysis of the themes that are emerging. I think for me, doing that 12 monthly would be too long, and I would like to ask that that was perhaps considered every 6 months or even shorter periods, and to not wait 12 months or 6 months to have our first whistleblowing analysis. If we could have that ASAP, please, especially in light of the rise in whistleblowing complaints over the last year. The Committee on Standards in Public Life has just published a report called Recognising and Responding to Early Warning Signs in Public Sector Bodies. It's hot off the press. It was just last month, so it's understandable if it's not explicitly referenced in this policy. But it suggests 20 questions that organisations, public sector organisations, can consider. I'm not going to read out all 20, not all of them are applicable, but there are 3 in particular on speaking up, and these are questions that the committee suggests public bodies ought to ask themselves. What do you do to build an open culture where people feel comfortable raising issues, asking questions, and sharing their ideas? How do you help your employees to understand that everyone in your organisation has a responsibility to speak up when they see something going wrong? And are there clear and well understood ways for people to raise concerns formally? I think this policy goes a long way toward that. Also, how do you know these routes are trusted? So not to put you too much on the spot with 3 quite detailed questions, but I would encourage you to consider what the responses to those might be and what additional framework might need to sit around this whistleblowing policy to encourage that culture of openness.
Before you respond, Liz, I just wondered if that was a formal proposal to have reports every 6 months, because I think what we need to consider is officer time and the need, what difference it will make if we hear them after 6 months, or because we're only giving oversight here to make sure the process is working okay. But I mean, I'm sure Liz will want to respond to that, but maybe we just need to consider this a little bit first before we look to amend the recommendation. Liz.
Yes, to take your second point first, that's really helpful in relation to the reference to the Committee on Standards and Public Life questions. I think you're absolutely right that there are 2 of those questions that relate to a whistleblowing policy, which is a formal process and framework. That is one of the ways that we ensure that people understand how they can raise concerns. It's a clear framework, it's a written policy, it's published on the Council's website. And how do we know they're trusted? By testing that they're used is a good way of doing that, and it is used. And one view you could take on, for example, an increase in complaints is that the system's working. So you need to balance. You want it to work, but then you don't want so many complaints that you have themes that you're concerned about. So I think those 2 questions are answered. And I think your other questions about how do you ensure an open culture, that is a question that's beyond the policy. It's much more about the culture of an organisation. And I know as part of our organisation redesign, one of the key features around being a learning organisation is about being a psychologically safe organisation. And one of the key pillars of all of the work that we're doing in terms of embedding the new organisational structure, but also any new policies that we agree, all are looked at under the lens of the 5 pillars that we have, one of which is including being a psychologically safe organisation, which means people feel they can raise issues. So it's very much front and centre of all the work that we're doing, and you see that now in all our policies and thinking coming through, but it is a wider question than from the policy. And then in terms of the frequency of reporting, I do absolutely hear your concern about not wanting to wait 12 months. I think my view, and it's obviously for committee to consider and suggest an amended recommendation if you wish to, and to vote on that. But my view would be the numbers are overall quite low. I'm not making a judgment about that, but just saying in terms of the data that you would have, if it was anything more frequent, I think it would be a very thin report. And also we have to be clear that the data that I'm going to be able to share about the content is going to be very much a summary and very high level because of the nature of whistleblowing complaints. So I really wanted to have quite a sort of rich and useful report that, you know, had a decent span of time to look at and a decent number of themes to look at, so that it really had some meaning. And I do echo Councillor West's point that in terms of what this committee will be doing, it won't be making a decision on the outcome of whistleblowing complaints. That doesn't sit with delegation to this committee. It is about overseeing that the process is working. So my recommendation would be to have a 12-month report that is meaningful. But, you know, as I say, I'm very happy to take those other views on board and see where the committee falls.
Councillor Gage.
Yeah, I completely accept and agree that we want a rich and meaningful report. I think, and you can tell me if I'm stepping outside the remit of the committee here, that as well as understanding whether the whistleblowing process is working, understanding the themes and topics that are arising, perhaps in a very broad sense, and also considering complaints that are not pursued through a whistleblowing framework but are raised under it, will give this committee perhaps some insight into topics it might want to further scrutinise.
So I would say that probably not, in the sense that the type of issues that we are expecting to be raised under whistleblowing are those of fraud, corruption, unlawful behaviour and wrongdoing, which wouldn't be pursued by this committee in the sense of, you know, action by a committee. That would need to be action taken by officers, or if a wholesale new policy in relation to a particular issue was required, that would need to go through the sort of cabinet member decision potentially. So I think the sort of thing that you would expect to see coming in through a whistleblowing complaint, it isn't the sort of thing you would then expect this committee to form policy over.
I'll make a suggestion. I think if we run with officer advice now, see how it goes, and then if in a year or so's time we feel that things need to change because it's not proving adequate, we want more information on more frequency, then we can revisit this matter. But as it's all new before us now, I think Liz makes a fair point. I think we need to go with that, if you don't mind.
Yeah, no, I'm happy to go with that. And will we then wait 12 months for our first whistleblowing report, or will you be able to produce something sooner?
Yeah, I was expecting it to be 12 months from the date of approving the new policy. So it's sort of, you know, a report on the operation of the new policy, with me having oversight of it, because I've only come into this role recently. So I will then have oversight of all of the whistleblowing complaints, rather than needing to go back and try and identify what's happened in the past. So I was thinking 12 months from the date of the implementation of the new policy.
I'm disagreeing with that as well, because obviously there's stuff that's already happened that we could be looking at soon. We don't need to wait for the unfolding 12 months to be able to look at that without wishing to burden you too much. But I think I can see the point to try and get there in the next so many months, and then 12 months after that.
Yeah, so we could bring one to not the next meeting, but the one after, which would be, then that would be 6 months, wouldn't it? And then an annual report thereafter. That perhaps might work, and feel that, you know, so that you feel that you've started the work. And then also it will be interesting to make sure that to take committee's feedback on the kind of data I've been able to produce and what more you'd like to see. So I'll be keen to get that feedback.
I think puts us in September or something like that. Yeah. Okay, thank you. Have we got any other questions? Councillor Gilmore.
I have a question from Councillor Grimshaw. She's looking over us, I'm sure. So she's She just wanted to know in terms of the numbers that are up. So what you thought, why they were up this year, Liz, I suppose that was the first one. And the second part was, is there a welfare kind of follow up at all on the person who is making the allegation, the whistleblower?
Thank you. Yes, in relation to the numbers, it would be speculation. It is speculation to try and identify the reason. In the sense that I have been back and looked at the 2024 whistleblowing complaints, because I have got oversight of those numbers and the headlines, and I haven't been able to identify any particular trigger that would suggest why there were 20 in 24, 5 and 12 in 23, 24. So it is conjecture. One thought I had was that because of the KC report that was published, and there was a lot of publicity around that in relation to City Clean, that was widely published as a whistleblowing, an issue that had come in via whistleblowing. So I did wonder whether that real publicity, which was something that we, unlike the publicity we'd ever seen before around whistleblowing, may have raised awareness. So that was one thought I had, but other than that, I don't know. And in relation to the second question about welfare follow up, it's absolutely the case. Each complaint dealt with. They're all very different, as you can imagine. So each one is dealt with and investigated according to the appropriate route for investigation into that matter. So it might be internal audit looking at the matter, or it might be human resources colleagues who are leading it, or it might be a service directorate. And so the approach will very much depend on the nature of each complaint. And if it's an individual who's vulnerable, for example, then absolutely yes, there would be a welfare follow up in the sense of reporting back to them, ensuring that they're kept informed as to what's happening, ensuring that they're clear around anonymity if that's what they want. But there are different types of complaints. Some of them wouldn't require a welfare follow up. So I can assure you that where that's appropriate, then we are mindful of that and do offer that support.
So just have one follow-up on that from Councillor Grimshaw, and it's probably something for the report in 6 months' time, which was just how many people who whistleblow remain employed by the council. So is there kind of a causal relationship there, I suppose, that could be explored? So probably something for 6 months' time.
So yeah, I'll take that into the report for 6 months' time if there's data I can share on that.
Councillor Gage.
Thank you. Just following on from the question about supporting individuals who've raised a whistleblowing concern or complaint, is there going to be any, or is there already some training or support for individuals who are receiving whistleblowing complaints, and any best practice around using trauma-informed principles to receive that complaint from a person who may be in some distress?
Presumably it's only specific officers that are receiving those.
So depending on the nature of the complaint, as I said, depends who it's given to investigate. And so where that was an issue, we would ensure that somebody with the correct training was investigating it, in the same way that we, for example, if allegations are made relating to a particular issue, we make sure that the person investigating it is trained in that area. So yes, that is right, but it's not applicable to every type of complaint.
Yeah, thank you. I'm thinking really about the initial disclosure, which may for some individuals have quite a high barrier to speaking up, and in terms of encouraging a culture of openness, it would be good for them to know, I think, that they could be in a neutral, supported and trauma-informed circumstance when they're doing that. There was something also I noted in the whistleblowing form that you asked people who are making a potential whistleblowing complaint or disclosure to attest that they're doing so in good faith. And I wondered whether that could be something that we could start from a position of an assumption of good faith, rather than asking them to certify that.
Yeah, I think we do start from this. I mean, in every investigation is approached from the starting point that it will be investigated with an open mind. You know, that is the starting point. And the reason for that attestation request is through time having the process having been occasionally abused by people who have a different agenda. And so it is felt that it's something that people do need to take it seriously. It is a serious issue, and you are instigating a serious set of resources being input to investigate something. So we do equally want people to take it seriously. But as I say, I can assure you that whenever a complaint is received, it's approached entirely neutrally, and it's not one individual whose opinion is taken on that. We meet as a group of professionals with HR, internal audit, and legal colleagues together to ensure that there is that broad and open approach to investigation.
Councillor Mackie.
Yeah, so just to summarise, you're saying that we are secure that the people who are dealing with whistleblowers from whatever it is they have been affected by are trained in that area of dealing with people with those particular concerns. Are you saying that we're secure that that is actually the case in all circumstances?
I'm providing reassurance that I think appropriate investigators are allocated to investigate an issue. I can't confirm that a specific training qualification has been undertaken, for example, in relation to each of the whistleblowing complaints that have been investigated, only that we assess very carefully the nature of the complaint and who the right body or person is to investigate it. And that is a factor that we consider to ensure that that person is properly and appropriately qualified to do so. Whether that means a sort of separate qualification or training sort of certificate, I wouldn't be able to confirm that. Only that, yeah, as I say, we make sure that they are investigated appropriately. That includes making sure the person doing the investigation is properly trained.
Thank you. That's good to hear.
Councillor Gage.
Sorry to put you on the spot on this again. I think it's motivated from a place that we all share a concern for individuals speaking up, for people receiving disclosures, and also for understanding the useful valves and analysis and learning that we can do as an organisation from it. And it is fantastic to see this policy brought forward as a visible expression of our commitment to do that. Just one last question is that the paper says that you've rightly and commendably sought input on the new policy from key internal parties and union reps and the policy consultative group. I wondered, did we seek input from the people who've made whistleblowing complaints over the last year, or people who've handled them?
Would that be appropriate?
No, we didn't do that. I think we've by going to the policy consultative group that includes union representation. I would expect that to ensure that views of staff, who are the primary target audience for this policy, are represented there, and the unions can reach out and ensure that when they give their feedback, they're doing so on behalf of their members. And I think that is appropriate to do that. And in addition to the policy consultative group, we also looked at best practice outside of the organisation in terms of what's considered to be best practice for a whistleblowing policy. So I hope that it provides sufficient reassurance.
Okay. I think it's a good discussion because I think the organisation always has a lot to learn from people that whistleblow, not to fear them. and they do need supporting. And I think Liz can only go so far in setting up the framework and making it available to people and to say, yes, you can trust that. I think it's down to the leadership of the council as well to project that safe space. You're welcome. We want you to do this because it's beneficial to us as well as yourselves. So I think that's, you can take that back to the administration. But it's been good to hear your concern that is going to work well for people and that they will feel they can trust and they're not going to be blown out. I think it does say somewhere in the policy about Protect, which is an organisation that helps support people to approach the right responsible body. I don't know if that would help with as well with getting back to the right space within the council, but I can understand that somebody would be reluctant to approach a member of the same organisation as they're worried about in the first instance, but there are other support mechanisms there. My question, Liz, was when we had the pre-meet, I did suggest that there's a list on page 105 of the regulatory bodies that you would whistleblow to, other than the council itself. So depending on what the nature of the problem. I did suggest that maybe the Charities Commission and HMRC should be there because they are part of the published statutory list, or whatever the right terminology is for this, because I think they're relevant because we have charities that contract to us and they may not be being well run. And a member of our staff may be concerned about the activities within that charity, for example. So I was just wondering if they could go onto that as well.
I think the issue there is that this is the policy for concerns about council behaviour issues around the council's powers and functions. So if somebody had a concern about a charity, then that should be raised with the Charities Commission directly. It's not a council function, so I don't think we want to list the bodies, the regulatory bodies that we've listed here are relevant to council functions, that where people remain dissatisfied with the an outcome from the council, they can go to that next tier up, if you like, because they relate to the exercise of council functions. So I'm not sure that adding other bodies, but other public bodies, might sort of dilute the purpose of having the list here.
I hear what you're saying. Right. Have we any other questions at all? No? Okay. Right, thank you. In that case, I'll move to the recommendations, which are as published still. We didn't alter that, but we're mindful about what's been said about having our first report September, I think. So I'm not going to read them all out. They're on page 87. Do we agree the recommendations? Thank you. Okay. And our final report on page 111 is the standards update. Victoria, if you'd like to introduce, please.
Thank you, Chair. Yes. So members are familiar with...
Thank all the officers leaving now for their presence. Thank you.
I think members are very familiar with this report, which you do receive at each meeting of this committee. It's a report that seeks to provide reassurance that when we do receive in complaints about members of the council, that those complaints are being dealt with in accordance with the council's policies and procedures. It is a report that also seeks to update you on relevant matters, any changes. And of course, this is the space which we report back on the watching brief we are keeping following the government's indication that they're minded to change the standards framework substantively. So no news on that front. So the report however, does do what it usually does, which is list complaints, list redacted information about the complaints that have either been received in since the time of the last meeting or were unresolved at the time of the last meeting, and provide some information regarding them. I won't seek to address you in any more detail, but obviously happy to take any questions. Thank you.
So just before anyone else asks, so you've put in your report that the consultation was recently closed. It's been backed by the Committee for Standards in Public Life. We haven't yet heard from the government, but have we got any idea of when we may hear?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, two consultations, one for the local government community, and members were alerted to the consultation and encouraged to respond. And then a second consultation process for a wider stakeholder group, and that went out to the general world. Both of those finished around January, I think. And since then, some organisations have published their responses. So they've put their response through the official channel, and they've also published on their own websites the information that they sought to provide as a response. So I mentioned the Committee on Standards in Public Life, who do appear to be in favour of the quite substantive changes that the government said it's minded to consider. Also, the Local Government Association has also provided a very detailed response, which is on their website. Obviously, that's their response, so I haven't gone into it in detail because they're just one body which is responding, albeit quite an important one. And of course, throughout the country, people have responded. I don't have any special information, I'm afraid. I wish I did. I don't have anything, even soft intel for you on what the plan is, what the timescales are, but we are keeping an eye out because obviously it will change this area. If anything like the changes that we mooted are brought in, it will be a significant change.
We'll have to be patient to see how our world changes. Okay. Questions? Councillor Meadows.
Thank you, Victoria, for the report. You've sanitised it so well. I don't even see anything to complain about in here, except what's the NA, the not applicable? There's so many of those, and they may be A, B, or C in terms of priority, is that, or description of complaint type, but they're all not applicable. What was the point in putting them in?
Yes, through you, Chair. Thank you for the question, Councillor Meadows. That column, if you look at page 1, that column provides a space in which to indicate if the complaint's been determined, what the basis for determining the complaint is. So the ones that have NA by them have not yet been determined, so there's nothing to say because they haven't been determined. So when they are determined, obviously we'll put some information in about what the basis was, which is obviously something that we do provide to people who make a complaint. Obviously, we do give them a rationale for whatever decision is reached. That will be into the column.
Just come back quickly. Not applicable doesn't actually work then, does it? It should be, say, to be determined or TBD or something. When it says, it suggests to me not applicable means it's not relevant.
No, happy to have the feedback. I will review the wording and put something along the lines of what you suggest if members wish it. That's fine. Thank you.
Which bit are we looking at? Sorry.
Yeah.
That one?
Yeah.
Oh, right, okay.
They're still open, haven't they?
Yeah, okay. Fair point. Victoria, look at the wording. We keep tiffling with all this, don't we? So why stop now? Okay. You okay with that?
Yeah, it's fine. It's just so sanitised. I used to look forward to reading these, and now there's nothing to read.
Councillor Gilmore.
So another question from Councillor Grimshaw. So I think I know the answer to this, but I'll ask it anyway. So she's asking in terms of if someone is making multiple complaints, is it possible to see that in terms of the information that we get. I assume every complaint is kept in its own merits and therefore we don't, but just pass that back.
Yes, thank you. That is an interesting question. We don't currently compile that data. We have it available because it's across the complaint data, but we don't put it in a table or do anything with it. It does press on the point that hopefully is apparent from the table, which is that, for instance, 4 of the complaints were made by the same individual, and they pressed on a particular issue and how that was dealt with in a particular agenda item. So much sort of, internal debate about whether or not that should have been allocated for reference numbers, because it then looks like 4 complaints. It's an imprecise science. I can see that giving you some information about the number of complainants could possibly flush out a little of that. That's certainly something I can look at doing if you think that would be helpful in the future. I don't know if the monitoring officer has any thoughts about that. I would have thought it'd be something relatively simple to do, but I'll defer.
I absolutely agree. As you say, simple to add, a little bit more information for you to have. You can, as Victoria said, you can kind of work it out, but why not be explicit? So no issue with that.
Thank you.
It's a difficult balance, isn't it? And we've discussed this before, that we can't give the game away. So, but we're eager to always learn more information so that it brings this a bit more to life. And we feel that we can do our job of oversight better. So we'll keep looking at it. Thank you. Any other questions? No? Okay. Right. In that case, I propose that we accept the recommendations, which, where are they? That we note the report. Agreed? Thank you. Okay, now I was at this point saying, oh, that's it done, but we're not, are we? Because we've got item 53, items referred for council, which would be for information. Do we wish to send any out? No, I don't think anyone has yet. It's been rather off-putting since they're no longer debated. Okay, so item 54, items for next meeting. Now, we've already had the discussion about the budget implementation of VFM interim findings, and I think we're also going to in some way have items that allow us to discuss points that were raised on the internal audit, but that's probably going to just be within the internal audit report, I would imagine. But it's about having the officers turn up to be able to answer the questions. So I'm not quite sure how that really works, because the report won't necessarily include those items. I'll leave Liz think about it. Okay. I wouldn't want to lose those. No. Okay. Has anyone else got any other items you wish on the agenda? No? Okay. All right. Thank you. In that case, I get to close the meeting. Okay. We've done well. Just over 2 hours. Thank you.